Okay, great. So we have our student data util created. The next step is that we need to create our MVC servlet. So what I'll do is I'll simply right click, I'll say new servlet. And this will bring up the dialog window here. For the class name for our servlet, we're going to call it MVC Demo Servlet 2. So that's the name that we'll have here for it. And actually I have a typo here. Let me fix that typo to a lowercase w. Good. And now you can go ahead and hit the finish button once you're happy with that. Okay, great. So again, Eclipse does a lot of work. It creates a very basic servlet for us. On the first two lines here, 13 and 14, it sets up our @web servlet for MVC Demo Servlet 2. So that's the basic off-the-shelf stuff that Eclipse will generate for us. What I want to focus on here is this doGet method, because that's where the requests are going to come into, this doGet. So I'll just kind of clean up, make some white space here, give me some room to work with. And what I'd like to do is actually, inside of this doGet method, is remove that auto-generated code, and I want to put my own code there. So I'll simply highlight this and delete it. And again, I like to kind of go step by step, and I also like to start with comments here. So I'll just write out some comments as far as what I have to do. So the first thing I need to do is get data from the helper class. That's the student data util that we created a little earlier. And then the next thing I need to do is add this list of students to the request attribute or the request object. Then the next thing I need to do is actually get the request dispatcher. And once I have the request dispatcher, then I can forward it to the appropriate JSP page. So those are the basic steps of what I need to do in my servlet code inside of this doGet method. All right, so let me start writing some code. So I'll get the list of students from that student data util, our model or our helper class. So I'll simply say student data util.get students. And that's the method that we created in that previous video. And I need to go through and just fix some of the imports here for the Java util.list. All right, so now I need to add the students to the request object. So I simply set an attribute. So I say request.setAttribute, and I give the name. So I'll call it student_list. That's the name. And then I give a reference to the object from the previous line, students. So I give the name, comma, the object. Next, what I do is I get the request dispatcher. So I say request dispatcher. Dispatcher equals request.get request dispatcher. And I simply give a path to the JSP page. So the page I'm going to send it over to is this viewstudents2.jsp. And again, go ahead and fix up some of the imports here for the request dispatcher class. All right, so that's my request dispatcher. Now I need to actually forward the request and response over using this request dispatcher. So here I say dispatcher.forward. And then I pass in the request response objects. And these objects were actually passed in as method params up on line 31. All right, so this looks good. This is basically the code that we need to add in our MVC servlet to talk to our helper class, the model, add the students to the request object, get the request dispatcher, and then forward. So this is all really good. And we built all of this code from scratch. So in the next video, we'll build out the JSP page.